So your vocabulary notebook should be opened to the words from yesterday. Wonder Part 1, chapters 1 through 5. Go ahead and draw a squiggly line underneath number 3. And then go ahead, take up 2 lines. Write this kind of big, 2 neat lines. Wonder Part 1, chapters or chaps, whatever, 6 through 9. And this should be on your desk. And this should be kind of big so that you can see, hey, here's a new one. You might even want to skip a line under the squiggle, so that you know this is from a new section. And then, of course, today's date. October 13th, 2020, and then we're going to underline the title. Yes, sorry.
So, whenever we're reading Wonder, you want us to take up 2 whole lines?
Yes, so that you're writing it kind of big. Okay, and then we're going to go ahead and keep numbering. We're going to keep going with the numbers because we're technically still on the same part. So, today we have number 4. Number 4 is the word smirk. Smirk. S-M-I-R-K. Smirk. Smirk can be a noun or a verb, but in today, what we read today, we're going to see it as a noun. And it means a conceited or snobby smile. A smirk, S-M-I-R-K, is a noun. It's a conceited or snobby smile. A synonym, or another word for smirk, is sneer. S-N-E-E-R. Let's see. Aaron, this is your word. You only have one word today. So a smirk, S-M-I-R-K, it's a noun. It can also be a verb, which means to do this, but we're going to see it as a noun. And it's a conceited or snobby smile. Another word for smirk. A synonym is sneer. So if you read the word sneer, you know it means the same thing. So in context, no, that's just your group, explained Charlotte, ignoring Julian's sneer. Okay, Aaron, you need me to spell any of these words? Make sure that when you're writing the definition, you're matching each word. Instead of just looking at the whole definition, look at each individual word to make sure that it is there in your book, that you didn't skip the word, and that it is spelled the exact same way. Look at smirk, look at the colon, look at noun, look at the semicolon, look at a, look at conceited, look at or, look at snobby, look at smile, look at the semicolon again, and look at sneer. Does every single word and punctuation mark match exactly? Sorry, you should have waited to get your book because you just missed everything I just said. You didn't need it right that moment, so you could have waited. Because now what I want you to do is once you're finished, go ahead and put your vocabulary notebook away. Make sure your desk is completely clear. That means pencils and erasers and all of that go into your pencil bag because I don't want them there to distract you. Now is when you could have gone to get your book, sorry. because now we have a transition. Make sure that you are sitting up straight, facing the front, with nothing to distract you. Your back is all the way back against the chair. Your chest is just barely touching your desk. Your book should be out on your desk. And as we're reading, I want you to listen for this word. Listen for this word. If you hear it, keep it in mind, because I might ask who heard the word, and then I'll ask for volunteers. So make sure that you're listening for this word as we read. When we get to the questions, yes, you can go back and look in your book, but remember, you only have a certain amount of time when we do it during school, which means you may not have time to go back and look at your book. So make sure that you are really listening and focusing. Make sure your feet are down. Your chair is scooted all the way in so that it's just touching your chest. Don't squeeze yourself. Your feet should be down. Scoot your chair in. Your book should be on your desk, not in your lap, not up like this. It can be up a little bit, but it doesn't need to be up a whole lot. Some of you, I want to be able to see your faces. Okay. So we are on page 15. Make sure that you are reading along with me. Use your finger to follow. Okay, make sure you're on page 15. When I see that everybody is on page 15, I will continue. Girls at home, your head should not be down. Your chair should be scooted as far up as you can so that your chest is just barely, so you're not leaning forward in the chair. Your back should be against the chair, and your chest should be touching the top of the table or the desk. Not squeezing yourself, just so that you can't lean forward or lean back. You're sitting up straight. Okay, we're on page 15. Heads up, off hands, and ready to follow along. Chapter 6, Paging Mr. Tushman. I would have been more nervous about meeting Mr. Tushman if I'd known I was also going to be meeting some kids from the new school. But I didn't know, so if anything, I was kind of giggly. I couldn't stop thinking about all the jokes Daddy had made about Mr. Tushman's name. So when me and Mom arrived at Beecher Prep a few weeks before the start of school, and I saw Mr. Tushman standing there, waiting for us at the entrance, I started giggling right away. He didn't look at all like what I pictured, though. I guess I thought he would have a huge butt, but he didn't. In fact, he was a pretty normal guy. Tall and thin. Old, but not really old. He seemed nice. He shook my mom's hand first. "Hi, Mr. Tushman. It's so nice to see you again," said Mom. "This is my son, August." Mr. Tushman looked right at me and smiled and nodded. He put his hand out for me to shake. "Hi, August," he said, totally normally. "It's a pleasure to meet you." "Hi," I mumbled, dropping my hand into his hand while I looked down at his feet. He was wearing red Adidas. "So," he said, kneeling down in front of me, so I couldn't look at his sneakers, but had to look at his face. "Your mom and dad have told me a lot about you." "Like what have they told you?" I asked. "Sorry?" "Honey, you have to speak up," said Mom. "Like what?" I asked, trying not to mumble. I admit I have a bad habit of mumbling. "Well, that you like to read," said Mr. Tushman, "and that you're a great artist." He had blue eyes with white eyelashes. "And you're into science, right?" "Uh-huh," I said, nodding. "We have a couple of great science electives at Beecher," he said. "Maybe you'll take one of them?" "Uh-huh," I said, though I had no idea what an elective was. So, are you ready to take a tour? You mean we're doing that now? I said. Did you think we were going to the movies? He answered, smiling as he stood up. You didn't tell me we were taking a tour, I said to Mom in my accusing voice. Augie, she started to say. It'll be fine, August, said Mr. Tushman, holding his hand out to me. I promise. I think he wanted me to take his hand, but I took Mom's instead. He smiled and started walking toward the entrance. Mommy gave my hand a little squeeze, though I didn't know if it was an I love you squeeze or an I'm sorry squeeze. Probably a little bit of both. The only school I'd ever been inside was Via's. When I went with Mom and Dad to watch Via sing in spring concerts and stuff like that. The school was very different. It was smaller. It smelled like a hospital. Chapter 7. Nice Mrs. Garcia. We followed Mr. Tushman down a few hallways. There weren't a lot of people around, and the few people who were there didn't seem to notice me at all, though that may have been because they didn't see me. I sort of hid behind Mom as I walked. I know that sounds kind of babyish of me, but I wasn't feeling very brave right then. We ended up in a small room with the words, Office of the Middle School Director on the door. Inside, there was a desk with a nice-seeming lady sitting behind it. This is Mrs. Garcia, said Mr. Tushman, and the lady smiled at Mom and took off her glasses and got up out of her chair. My mother shook her hand and said, Isabel Pullman, nice to meet you. And this is August, Mr. Tushman said. Mom kind of stepped to the side a bit, so I would move forward. Then that thing happened that I've seen happen 1,000,000 times before. When I looked up at her, Mrs. Garcia's eyes dropped for a second. It was so fast, no one else would have noticed, since the rest of her face stayed exactly the same. She was smiling a really shiny smile. Such a pleasure to meet you, August, she said, holding out her hand for me to shake. Hi, I said quietly, giving her my hand, but I didn't want to look at her face, so I kept staring at her glasses, which hung from a chain around her neck. Wow, what a firm grip, said Mrs. Garcia. Her hand was really warm. The kid's got a killer handshake, Mr. Tushman agreed, and everyone laughed above my head. You can call me Mrs. G, Mrs. Garcia said. I think she was talking to me, but I was looking at all the stuff on her desk now. That's what everyone calls me. Mrs. G, I forgot my combination. Mrs. G, I need a late pass. Mrs. G, I want to change my elective. Mrs. G is actually the one who runs the place, said Mr. Tushman, which again made all the grown-ups laugh. I'm here every morning by 7:30, Mrs. Garcia continued, still looking at me while I stared at her brown sandals with small purple flowers on the buckles. So if you ever need anything, August, I'm the one to ask. And you can ask me anything. Okay, I mumbled. Oh, look at that cute baby, Mom said, pointing to one of the photographs on Mrs. Garcia's bulletin board. Is he yours? No, my goodness, said Mrs. Garcia, smiling a big smile now that was totally different from her shiny smile. You've just made my day. He's my grandson. What a cutie, said Mom, shaking her head. How old? In that picture, he was 5 months, I think, but he's big now, almost 8 years old. Wow, said Mom, nodding and smiling. Well, he is absolutely beautiful. Thank you, said Mrs. Garcia, nodding like she was about to say something else about her grandson. But then, all of a sudden, her smile got a little smaller. We're all going to take very good care of August, she said to Mom, and I saw her give Mom's hand a little squeeze. I looked at Mom's face, and that's when I realized she was just as nervous as I was. I guess I liked Mrs. Garcia, when she wasn't wearing her shiny smile. Chapter 8. Jack, Will, Julian, and Charlotte. We followed Mr. Tushman into a small room across from Mrs. Garcia's desk. He was talking as he closed the door to his office and sat down behind his big desk, though I wasn't really paying much attention to what he was saying. I was looking around at all the things on his desk. Cool stuff, like a globe that floated in the air and a Rubik's-type cube made with little mirrors. I liked his office a lot. I liked that there were all these neat little drawings and paintings by students on the walls, framed like they were important. Mom sat down in a chair in front of Mr. Tushman's desk. And even though there was another chair right next to hers, I decided to stand beside her. "Why do you have your own room and Mrs. G doesn't?" I said. "You mean, why do I have an office?" asked Mr. Tushman. "You said she runs the place," I said. "Oh, well, I was kind of kidding. Mrs. G is my assistant." "Mr. Tushman is the director of the middle school," Mom explained. "Do they call you Mr. T?" I asked, which made him smile. "Do you know who Mr. T is?" he answered. "I pity the fool," he said in a funny, tough voice, like he was imitating someone. I had no idea what he was talking about. "Anyway, no," said Mr. Tushman, shaking his head. "No one calls me Mr. T, though I have a feeling I'm called a lot of other things I don't know about. Let's face it, a name like mine is not so easy to live with. You know what I mean?" Here I have to admit I totally laughed because I knew exactly what he meant. "My mom and dad had a teacher called Miss Butt," I said. "Augie," said Mom. But Mr. Tushman laughed. "Now that's bad," said Mr. Tushman, shaking his head. "I guess I shouldn't complain. Hey, so listen, August, here's what I thought we would do today." "Is that a pumpkin?" I said, pointing to a framed painting behind Mr. Tushman's desk. "Augie, sweetie, don't interrupt," said Mom. "You like it?" said Mr. Tushman, turning around and looking at the painting. "I do too. And I thought it was a pumpkin too, until the student who gave it to me explained that it's actually not a pumpkin. It is, are you ready for this? A portrait of me. Now, August, I ask you, do I really look that much like a pumpkin?" "No," I answered, though I was thinking yes. Something about the way his cheeks puffed out when he smiled made him look like a jack-o'-lantern. Just as I thought that, it occurred to me how funny that was. Cheeks, Mr. Tushman. And I started laughing a little. I shook my head and covered my mouth with my hand. Mr. Tushman smiled like he could read my mind. I was about to say something else, but then all of a sudden I heard other voices outside the office. Kids' voices. I'm not exaggerating when I say this, but my heart literally started beating like I'd just run the longest race in the world. The laughter I had inside just poured out of me. The thing is, when I was little, I never minded meeting new kids because all the kids I met were really little too. What's cool about really little kids is that they don't say stuff to try to hurt your feelings, even though sometimes they do say stuff that hurts your feelings, but they don't actually know what they're saying. Big kids, though, they know what they're saying, and that is definitely not fun for me. One of the reasons I grew my hair long last year was that I like how my bangs cover my eyes. It helps me block out the things I don't want to see. Make sure you're following along. Mrs. Garcia knocked on the door and poked her head inside. "They're here, Mr. Tushman," she said. "Who's here?" I said. "Thanks," said Mr. Tushman to Mrs. Garcia. "August, I thought it would be a good idea for you to meet some students who will be in your homeroom this year. I figured they could take you around the school a bit, show you the lay of the land, so to speak." "I don't want to meet anyone," I said to Mom. Mr. Tushman was suddenly right in front of me, his hands on my shoulders. He leaned down and said very softly in my ear, "It'll be okay, August. These are nice kids, I promise." "You're gonna be okay, Augie," Mom whispered with all her might. Before she could say anything else, Mr. Tushman opened the door to his office. "Come on in, kids," he said, and in walked 2 boys and a girl. None of them looked over at me or Mom. They stood by the door looking straight at Mr. Tushman like their lives depended on it. "Thanks so much for coming, guys, especially since school doesn't start until next month," said Mr. Tushman. "Have you had a good summer?" All of them nodded, but no one said anything. Great," said Mr. Tushman. "So guys, I wanted you to meet August, who's going to be a new student here this year. August, these guys have been students at Beecher Prep since kindergarten, though, of course, they were in the lower school building. But they know all the ins and outs of the middle school program. And since you're all in the same homeroom, I thought it would be nice if you got to know each other a little before school started, okay? So kids, this is August. August, this is Jack Will." Jack Will looked at me and put out his hand. When I shook it, he kind of half smiled and said, "Hey," and looked down really fast. "This is Julian," said Mr. Tushman. "Hey,"
said Julian, and did the same exact thing as Jack Will. Took my hand, forced a smile, looked down fast. And Charlotte, said Mr. Tushman. Charlotte had the blondest hair I've ever seen. She didn't shake my hand, but gave me a quick little wave and smiled. "Hi, August, nice to meet you," she said. "Hi," I said, looking down. She was wearing bright green Crocs. "So," said Mr. Tushman, putting his hands together in a kind of slow clap, "what I thought you guys could do is take August on a little tour of the school. Maybe you could start on the 3rd floor? That's where your homeroom class is going to be. Room 301. I think. Mrs. G is room 301, Mrs. Garcia called out from the other room. Room 301, Mr. Tushman nodded. And then you can show August the science labs in the computer room. Then work your way down to the library and the performance space on the 2nd floor. Take him to the cafeteria, of course." "Should we take him to the music room?" asked Julian. "Good idea, yes," said Mr. Tushman. "August, do you play any instruments?" "No," I said. It wasn't my favorite subject on account of the fact that I don't really have ears. Well, I do, but they don't exactly look like normal ears. Heads up. Still bodies. "Well, you may enjoy seeing the music room anyway," said Mr. Tushman. "We have a very nice selection of percussion instruments." "August, you've been wanting to learn to play the drums," Mom said, trying to get me to look at her. But my eyes were covered by my bangs as I stared at a piece of old gum that was stuck to the bottom of Mr. Tushman's desk. "Great, okay, so why don't you guys get going," said Mr. Tushman. "Just be back here in," he looked at Mom. "Half an hour, okay?" I think Mom nodded. "So, is it okay with you, August?" he asked me. I didn't answer. "Is that okay, August?" Mom repeated. I looked at her now. I wanted her to see how mad I was at her. But then I saw her face and just nodded. She seemed more scared than I was. The other kids had started out the door, so I followed them. "See you soon," said Mom, her voice sounding a little higher than normal. I didn't answer her. Chapter 9, The Grand Tour. Jack, Will, Julian, Charlotte, and I went down a big hallway to some wide stairs. No one said a word as we walked up to the 3rd floor. When we got to the top of the stairs, we went down a little hallway full of lots of doors. Julian opened the door marked 301. "This is our homeroom," he said, standing in front of the half-open door. "We have Miss Petosa. They say she's okay, at least for homeroom. I heard she's really strict if you get her for math, though." "That's not true," said Charlotte. "My sister had her last year and said she's totally nice." "Not what I heard," answered Julian, "but whatever." He closed the door and continued walking down the hallway. "This is the science lab," he said when he got to the next door. And just like he did 2 seconds ago, he stood in front of the half-open door and started talking. He didn't look at me once while he talked, which was okay because I wasn't looking at him either. "You won't know who you have for science until the first day of school, but you want to get Mr. Haller. He used to be in the lower school. He could play this giant tuba in class." "It was a baritone horn," said Charlotte. "It was a tuba," answered Julian, closing the door. "Dude, let him go inside so we can check it out," Jack Will told him, pushing past Julian and opening the door. "Go inside if you want," Julian said. It was the first time he looked at me. I shrugged and walked over to the door. Julian moved out of the way quickly, like he was afraid I might accidentally touch him as I passed him by. "Nothing much to see," Julian said, walking in after me. He started pointing to a bunch of stuff around the room. "That's the incubator. That big black thing is the chalkboard. These are the desks. These are the chairs. Those are the Bunsen burners. This is a gross science poster. This is chalk. This is an eraser." "I'm sure he knows what an eraser is," Charlotte said, sounding a little like Via. "How would I know what he knows?" Julian answered. "Mr. Tushman said he's never been in a school before." "You know what an eraser is, right?" Charlotte asked me. I admit I was feeling so nervous that I didn't know what to say or do except look at the floor. "Hey, can you talk?" asked Jack Will. "Yeah," I nodded. I still really hadn't looked at any of them yet. Not directly. "You know what an eraser is, right?" asked Jack Will. "Of course," I mumbled. "I told you there was nothing to see in here," said Julian, shrugging. I have a question, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. What exactly is homeroom? Is that like a subject? No, that's just your group, explained Charlotte, ignoring Julian's smirk. It's like where you go when you get to school in the morning and your homeroom teacher takes attendance and stuff like that. In a way, it's your main class, even though it's not really a class. I mean, it's a class, but I think he gets it, Charlotte, said Jack Will. Do you get it? Charlotte asked me. Yeah, I nodded at her. Okay, let's get out of here, said Jack Will, walking away. Wait, Jack, we're supposed to be answering questions, said Charlotte. Jack Will rolled his eyes a little as he turned around. Do you have any more questions? He asked. No, I answered. Oh, well, actually, yes. Is your name Jack or Jack Will? Jack is my first name. Will is my last name. Oh, because Mr. Tushman introduced you as Jack Will, so I thought, ha! You thought his name was Jack Will, laughed Julian. Yeah, some people call me by my first and last name, Jack said, shrugging. I don't know why. Anyway, can we go now? Let's go to the performance space next, said Charlotte, leading the way out of the science room. It's very cool. You'll like it, Augie. Okay. Go ahead and close your books.
So when you answer these questions, you must answer with at least 2 complete sentences with correct grammar. I will be counting off for incorrect grammar. So even if you have the questions exactly right, you have 2 sentences, you answered fully, you can lose a whole lot of points just by not having correct grammar, correct capital letters, correct end punctuation, commas in the right place, no extra commas, no run-ons, no fragments. So make sure that when you're reading after you write so that you can tell it makes sense. When you read it to yourself in your head, you can hear if it makes sense or not. Use text evidence when needed. That means what exactly happened in the story that told you the answer. Write the question with the number. So you're writing the whole question. Oops. Skip one line. Write the answer. Skip one line, then repeat. You can answer any questions in any order. You will have a certain amount of time. Let me get my phone and see how much time you're going to have. You will have 15 minutes to answer as much as you can. I should not look up and see you just sitting there over and over and over again. I understand I might look up once and you may be thinking, but if I look up over and over and over again and you're constantly just sitting there, I'm going to know you're not thinking. You're just sitting there trying to get the time up. Most of you should be able to answer at least 2 in 15 minutes. Nobody should be answering more than 3. If you are answering more than 3 questions in 15 minutes, it means you're not fully thinking about the questions. You need full, well thought out, good answers to these questions. Now, I'm going to read the questions, and then you can ask me what any words mean, and then we will begin. Once the 15 minutes is up, you will have 2 minutes to finish your thought, whatever question you're on, and then one at a time you're going to stack them on the back counter in groups. So the front row will be in one group, the back row will be in another group. Doesn't matter what order, just one at a time. Girls at home, you'll put it somewhere so that it can be scanned and sent to me by tomorrow morning. Okay, so number 1, choose one adjective. That's a describing word. Don't write, you're not writing anything yet because you get to choose any questions. You don't have to answer them in order. Pick the question that you can get the best answer for first. Then pick the next question, whatever you can give the second best answer for. Don't just pick the easy ones, because then I will be able to tell and your grade will show that, because effort counts in these questions. That means how much thought did you put into it? If you really didn't put much thought in it, you're going to lose 5 points. Starts at 100, you lose 5 points for not well thought out. You lose 10 points for not answering the question correctly. You lose 10 points if you only have one question answered and it's not very well thought out. No, you lose 20, I'm sorry. If you only have one question and it's not very thought out by the end of 15 minutes, because that's plenty of time to get a good answer. Okay, number 1, choose one adjective to describe Mr. Tushman based upon his first encounter, that means meeting, with August. Use textual, which is text evidence, to support your answer. So once you pick that adjective, about the first time, that first minute he meets August, what happened in the story that told you should pick that adjective? Number 2, how do you think August feels when he learns he is taking a tour of the school? This is how do you think he feels, and then why do you think that? Let me add that question. Why? You can't just say how he feels, you also say why you think he feels that way. Number 3, what is August's first impression of Mrs. Garcia? A first impression is, what does he think the first time he meets Mrs. Garcia? Number 4, who does Mr. Tushman introduce to August next? So who are the next people that Mr. Tushman introduces August to? How do they react to August? So those people that he introduces them to, how do they react to August? Number 5, what is your first impression of Julian? Not August, not Mom's, no one else's. What is your first impression? What do you think of Julian so far? Explain your answer. That means why. Number 5 is what do you think of Julian so far? Why do you think that? Any questions about the questions? Okay, when I say go, you will have 15 minutes. Once 15 minutes are up, you will not stop writing until 15 minutes are up. Once 15 minutes are up, you will have 2 minutes to finish the question that you're on. That means finish your thought, and then put it on the back counter one at a time. Go. You may use your book, but try not to rely on it, because then you won't have enough time to give good, well thought out answers. You should not be finishing all these questions. The only time I've ever had anybody finish every single question in any novel study I've ever done was because they had like these half-hearted, not very good answers. Yes, Carla?
I have a question.
Okay, now you should be able to see them better.
When you actually write it, do you have to copy it or just...
Yes, you have to copy the question, skip one line, then write your answer. Yes, you must copy the question.